I'm Adam from Army Painter, and today we're going to teach you how to paint the models from the Dungeons & Dragons Vault of Dragons board game. The magic in miniature painting is that it can be as simple or complicated as you want it to be. There's a plethora of techniques out there for you to master, but with a few simple techniques, painting can be really fun and you can achieve some great results. But before we get started, let's talk a little bit about the Vault of Dragons board game. Vault of Dragons is a new game that pits 2 to 4 players in up to 4 different factions in a race to discover the greatest treasure hoard in all of the realms. The models will come pre-colored in 4 faction-specific colors, but today with a few simple steps, we're going to show you how to really elevate the narrative by painting these models for your next gaming night. We primed our models with chaotic red, matte black, alien purple, and ultramarine blue using the Army Painter color primer sprays. In the case of the blue models, we also gave it 2 thin coats of Merfolk turquoise to match it as close as we could to the original plastic color. It's good to know that the D&D paint sets do come with a gray brush-on primer, but because we're essentially painting 4 specific factions here, we decided that we'd save a bunch of time by using the color primer sprays so that we can get the models finished in time for game night this Friday.
All right, we're going to start with the red faction, and we're going to be using a little bit of Dragon Fire Red here. Just going to give it a good shake and add it to my palette. This is the dry brush stage. So of course, when you're dry brushing, you're going to want to load up your brush, get some good coverage in there, and just with a paper towel, get some of the excess off of there. It's okay if you go a little bit heavy with this dry brush, as these models are so small. And we're just going to begin by flicking that red across the entirety of the models. It's okay if you're a little sloppy at this stage. We're just trying to bring up some of that red highlight across these models. Gonna work your brush back and forth. You can see just compared to my thumbnail here how small these models actually are. So don't get too focused on bringing out all of the details. We're just trying to add a little highlight to these models, create a little bit of extra definition with that Dragonfire Red. I'm going to finish up the red here and we'll come back to show you some of the other colors. So moving on to the black models, we're going to highlight this with Dungeon Stone. This is a nice mid-level gray. Again, I'm just going to give the bottle a good shake. I'm going to apply same technique across all of the models. Don't worry if this looks a little bit gray. Once we wash it back down in the later stages, it's gonna come back down to a nice black appearance. Something to really look out for is these areas here on the robes. They are a great spot. If you just take the flat of the brush, these D&D dry brushes are nice and flat, you can really pick out those details really quickly. It'll take about maybe 3 minutes to dry brush all of these models. We're going to go ahead and apply the same steps with Purple Worm from the D&D paint sets. So again, make sure our brush is nice and dry after giving it a good rinse. Load up that brush, really get those bristles filled in with that purple paint. And we're going to go right to them. And as you see here, it's just a nice subtle highlight. Really makes that purple stand out on the model. Since we went ahead and base coated these turquoise guys with Merfolk turquoise, adding Merfolk turquoise as a dry brush highlight is not going to work because it's going to be the same color. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to mix a little bit of Lawful White from the Dungeons & Dragons paint set with Merfolk turquoise to achieve the color that we want, just a nice subtle highlight. So we're going to do 1 drop of white to 1 drop of the turquoise. Now, the only reason I did just one drop of the white is because you can always add more white later if you're not getting the right highlight tone that you want. And just looking at this, I think it's gonna be just about right, just about all we'll need. But let's give it an application to the model so we can tell for sure. So let's start here on the robes, because that is always the greatest indicator for me because of those fine creases. Yep, you see here, that's the perfect highlight, exactly what we need here. So one drop Lawful White, one drop Merfolk Turquoise. We're gonna finish dry brushing these, the turquoise faction here, and then we're gonna check back in with the next steps.
Now that we've dry brushed the models, we're going to move on to painting all of the skin on these models.
We're going to be using the D&D detail brush. Usually I would recommend a base coat brush or even the starter brush from the set, but because these models are so small, I think this is the perfect application for it. So, okay, we're going to start here with the dwarf, and you can be a little loose with the paint here because we are going to be covering a lot of these areas with metals and other colors later. So we're just going to paint in the fleshy bits here. And say here on his hand. I'm not too worried if I get some of this flesh tone on the axe that he has there. I'm sorry, I called it a hammer a minute ago. There are some that do have hammers in this set, because we're going to be covering that up later. There you go, that's it for him. And let's see our wizard here. Just basing in these flesh tones. We're going to sneak under his little hood right up here. Don't worry if you get any on the beard.
With all the skin based in, we're going to move on to painting all of the hair and beards on the models. Now you can paint these any color you wish, yellow, blonde, brown, red, black, but for the sake of this tutorial and to speed things up, we're going to paint everything white.
Now white obviously is a bit translucent, especially when you're going over darker colors. It's not so terrible here on the turquoise, but I would definitely recommend giving the white 2 thin coats so as not to obscure any of the detail on these fantastic little models from Gale Force 9. But just as easy as that with the D&D detail brush, it's very simple to pick out these little details here. Like our maybe dwarf's mustache. There we go. Let's move on to this beautiful mage here. I always find typically when painting in a hairline to start from the back, the front, and pull backwards is a lot easier, especially when you've already blocked in the flesh tones, as you can see there. So we're going to repeat this across all 4 models, and we'll check in with you for the next step.
Now that the hair's all based in, we're going to move on to painting all of the metallic bits on the model.
And moving on, we're going to paint all of the metal parts of the model. We're going to be using Silver Dragon from the D&D paint sets. This is a great paint, and it does have a match to the broader range, as do many of the D&D paints, to the Army Painter War Paints range. This is a perfect match to Shining Silver, as it says here on the bottle right there. So we're going to start here with our little warrior and find the metal pieces that you want to block in, like right here around his shield. There's really nothing to it. Just gonna paint in the edges of the shield like so. He's got a little bit of armor right here on his shoulders, so we'll get those little pieces. You know what? I think this helmet needs to be metal as well. And of course, his axe. Just gonna give this 2 thin coats so we get none of that turquoise showing through, and we're gonna repeat this step across all of the models here, our mage, our wizard, and our 2 warriors here.
With all of the metallics finished, we're going to move on to painting owlbear brown on all of the boots, belts, and handles on the models.
With all of the metal bits complete, we're going to finish off the details using owlbear brown for the boots, belts, and things of that nature. There's some fur on the mage and the sorceress or wizard. So we're going to go right to that. So if you see back here underneath her hair, there is some, looks like fur pelts or something like that, the underside of her cape. So we're just going to go ahead and careful not to get any of the brown on the white hair that we've already done. Just nice and easy, block that in. Not a whole lot to it. A lot of these models have little pouches hanging from their belts. That's a good area for you to paint brown. And of course, it's probably the finest detail on the model that we're going to paint. Right here is the shaft of her staff, excuse me. Just careful with a real steady hand. Paint that in brown just like that. Now at this stage, if you do mess up, like right here, I just got a little bit of the brown, trying to sneak it into that little area between her fingers and the top of her staff that we painted in metallic. I'm just going to go back and grab some of that flesh tone and just paint that right back on there. There you go, like it never even happened.
With all of the base coats complete, we're going to add some depth and realism to the model using quick shade washes. We're going to be using the same wash across all of the models to help us save even more time.
With all of the brown bits complete, and I went ahead and added just a couple details on this mage, sorcerer, sorceress model, just a little bit of white around the trim. Nothing too fancy, I just couldn't help myself. But there we have it, starting to look pretty cool. Now, they are smaller models, and even though we dry brush them, they are a little bit flat, because all we've done is a base coat here. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a wash to redefine some of those details on the model. We're going to be using a shadow wash. Now, you could go ahead and use some of the different washes. We've got a brown wash and a flesh tone wash in the D&D sets. Because they're smaller models and we're trying to get this done real quick, we're just going to use one tone of wash. And the shadow wash is going to be perfect for what we need. We're just going to apply a little bit to the palette. Load up our brush, and we are using the base coat brush. This is, other than the dry brush, the largest brush that we make in the D&D set. So I'm going to start with this model here, our wizard, and from the top down, we're just going to apply this wash all over the model. And as you can see, very quickly, we are starting to get our definition back on the model. You see his cheekbones pop out, and his nose is more pronounced. And all of those details are now redefined on the model. This is almost like magic in a dropper bottle. I like to really load the brush up with a lot of the wash. You can see here, you can almost see it dripping off the side because you want to get full coverage of this model, of this wash on the model. So don't be afraid to go heavy with the wash. If it does begin to pool in areas that you don't like, don't worry, you just take your brush and move it around, push it back around. It's very, very simple. And here on our warrior. Again, I like to start from the top down. Let gravity help that wash find its way into the recesses and all of the crevices and details on that model. What I want you to see here is on this model, and it's very difficult to see in this light, but there's tons of fine detail on this chest plate. But once you add the wash, and especially these legs here, once you add the wash, those details then really jump out at you. We're going to go ahead and finish completing this across the rest of the models. And remember, washes do take a bit longer to dry, so now's a good time to make a cup of coffee, grab some lunch, maybe play a quick game of Vault of Dragons with your buddies.
With the wash complete, our painting is done. All that's left is to paint the bases of the model with Abyssal Black. If you wanted to, you could go ahead and add a couple finer highlights, but it's not really necessary as these are very small models and these are looking really cool, perfect for our Friday night game night this Friday. Now remember, you can find all of the Dungeons and Dragons paints in stores now or at www.thearmypainter.com along with the broader Army Painter line of paints and hobby tools. And remember, we love seeing your painting projects, so be sure to share them with us on Facebook and Instagram at The Army Painter.